Can you describe for me some of the geography of Gardena in relation to the rest of LA County? Where is Gardena?
Well, we're about, let's see, 12 miles south of downtown Los Angeles. It's called Gardena Valley, and actually, if you go up on Athens Hill, up toward Los Angeles, about 5 or 6 miles to the north of here, and look down, it is a gradually sloping valley. It slopes downward toward Gardena, then gradually rises toward the Palos Verdes Hills. So technically, it does seem to be a long sloping valley. There was low areas here, sloughs, swamp, some swampland, pretty much that. Redondo Beach is approximately 10 miles directly west, so the ocean is 10 miles west of us on that direction. To the south is Palos Verdes, which is also about 10 miles, and that's, of course, the end of the continent. And Los Angeles is 12 miles to the north, and eastward is Orange County in the desert area, Palm Springs in that area.
People often talk about how Gardena has this small town feeling, but within the confines of a big metropolis. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think gradually we're getting away from that. Unfortunately, up until maybe the last 10 years or so, it did have the small town atmosphere. Everyone knew everyone. When you went to church, you knew 90% of the people in there. Same at the schools. The mothers knew all of the other mothers. And from the sense that it was a small town, I would say yes, it was a small town atmosphere. You could shop here without. We had enough supermarkets. Had a hardware store. Shock's Hardware was one of the oldest hardware stores in the area. Went out of business recently. You could find anything there, including lamp wicks for oil lamps or anything. So it was a compact, small town atmosphere. Even though we're surrounded by, I think, 25 or 35 or 40 other cities in LA. Since then, it's kind of melded all into one kind of a mishmash. I can remember stationed out in San Diego during the war, and if you traveled from Los Angeles to San Diego, when you got from here to Long Beach, got south of Long Beach, there was a big open space before you got to Seal Beach and Newport Beach and La Jolla. So there were big gaps there, and little by little that's all filled in. Well, the same thing's happened here. All of these little cities have run together, and unless you know exactly where you are, you can't tell what town you're in. The eastern boundary of Gardena is the west side of Vermont. The east side of Vermont is LA City Strip until you get to Figueroa, in which case it turns into LA County. And if you go another few miles east of that, you're in Compton. So unless you know the exact streets, you're kind of, they've all run in together now. I think we're losing the small town feeling.
Was there a time in Gardena where you could recognize Gardena for its attributes, let's say?
Well, those of us that lived here knew that it was a good little town, and from the outside, most of the people, whenever you mentioned Gardena, they thought it was a gambling town. They thought that, I don't know, I guess they thought it was crime-ridden Sin City or something. But the card clubs were very noxious, and certain people, mostly from out of town, came to play cards there. And the local people mostly used it as a restaurant. They had the greatest meals in the world. And anybody that went out and celebrated at the fireman's ball or the policeman's ball usually would gather at one of the card clubs at 2 o'clock in the morning because they were open all night, and sit down and have a big midnight dinner at the card clubs at the restaurants. So the natives didn't think that there was anything wrong with the clubs. They donated to the churches. They donated to different charities, built a swimming pool. We thought they were great. Outsiders thought it was, I don't know. We even heard that some of the larger businesses, chain stores, I don't know if it was Sears or not, they were mentioned. Some of the chain stores wouldn't come in here because of the reputation of the card clubs, but I think they were ill-advised not to, because actually they were, I mean, if you're going to gamble, you're going to gamble somewhere. Look at Vegas. And, I mean, people are going to go there to gamble if they want to gamble. Gardena was great. I mean, the people that lived here loved it. Weather was perfect. Greatest Mediterranean weather you ever saw.
Tell me about the weather here. What?
Absolutely divine. Today you're here giving me this interview. It's probably 75 degrees out there. There's a slight breeze coming off the ocean. If you look out that window, you can see the trees moving. Almost every afternoon at this time or a little later, the breeze comes in off Redondo and Hermosa and cools it down. And in the 50-some years I've lived here, maybe 12 or 14 days out of the year, you require the covers at night. You don't require the covers at night. We don't have air conditioning here. We don't need it. It's just beautiful. Cools off every afternoon. And probably don't have enough rainfall, but then that's seasonal anyway, so it's great. Weather's perfect.
Let's talk about the fire department again. Going back to your years there, what was your first position?
Well, I was working at my brother's gas station. See the sign up there? Two of my brothers owned a gas station over here, not too far away, and I decided that I wasn't making enough money selling insurance and was getting an ulcer, so they said, how about coming to work at the gas station? We need some help. I did, and an old battalion chief, Joe Crum, poor guy's dead now, rest his soul, came by one day and said, do I want to work on the fire department? And I said, what for? Those guys sit around out there on captain's chairs and snap their suspenders and watch the girls go by. I was about 30. And, you know, I thought firemen were kind of lazy guys that didn't have much to do and couldn't get another job. And he said, well, it's pretty good pay, and retirement's pretty good. And I compared that to what I was making at the gas station and decided to go take the test. They had 3 openings, and out of 100 and some guys took the test. And I was probably one of the oldest, because 31 was the age limit, and I was 30 and a half. So they gave you an agility test and a written test and an oral exam, and I thought, oh, these young guys are going to turn me every way but loose. And when we got all done, I finished number 1, and so they hired me as a fireman. And I worked as a fireman for 5 years, 24-hour shifts, and 60 hours a week actually. And I had 2 kids come along, and I thought, well, I'm away from home a lot of times, and I thought fire prevention is a pretty good field, and maybe they need somebody to help them in fire prevention. They had 1 guy on fire prevention for the whole city. So I talked the chief into making me the fire inspector. And he created the position. I became the inspector and had the junior fire program, taught maybe 25,000 kids over the years on fire safety, maybe made 200 or 300 speeches at the schools, 15 or 20 a year for, I guess, 8 or 10 years. Made all the inspections and went up through the ranks, and finally after 20 years on the department, I made chief and was chief for the last 17 years before I retired in 1992. So I did make a pretty good career out of the fire department.
What do you remember as being some of the biggest challenges when you worked for the department?
Well, one of the important challenges was, it occurred to me, and I used to tell any new firemen that were coming on, that if anybody ever asks you the question on an oral exam, what's the primary job of a fire department? It's not putting out fires, it's fire prevention. So I felt that we ought to increase the fire prevention. So because I had the bright idea, they decided I should go around and inspect all the buildings in town by myself every year, which I had to do with all my other duties. But I got to know the buildings. And when I made captain and got on the fire engine, I knew every building in town because I'd inspected them every year for a number of years. That was a challenge, trying to cut down on fires and fire deaths, and we had a pretty good record. And the nice part of it is that after maybe 15 or 20 years went by after the junior fire program, and all the 5th and 6th graders in town at one time or another had me give them speeches on fire prevention. And I'd give the winners rides on the fire truck and take them up to Griffith Park to picnics and give them badges. And for many, many years, people would see me out in public and say, oh, I remember you, you're the guy that gave me the badge. And I couldn't smoke out in public either, because they'd say, look, there's a fire inspector, he's smoking. So anyway, it was fun. It was fun. Had some bad fires, and not really. Had an arsonist one time setting fire to all the churches. It was driving us all crazy, and we couldn't catch him, and he finally gave himself up, which I guess is just as good as catching him.